This episode of This Week Explained is brought to you by the good folks over at Fresh Roasted Coffee and Positively Tea. Okay, so let me tell you, I've been loving their coffee lately. They have this super fun coffee quiz on their website that helps you find the perfect blend. I took it, and it matched me with this smooth medium roast that's just so good. And if you're more of a tea person, don't worry. They've got you covered with Positively Tea. They've got everything. Organic, fair trade, single origin, you name it, they have it. Seriously, whether you're a coffee or tea drinker, you're going to find something you love. So, listeners, head over to the link in our show notes, click it, and it'll take you to a special offer on the coffee and tea. And when you get to checkout, use the promo code this week to get 20% off your first purchase.
Everybody wants cheap airfare, but where do you find it? You call low-cost airlines. They specialize in cheap flights, discount hotel rooms, cheap car rental rates, and with a best price guarantee. If you want the lowest prices on your airline tickets or other travel services, call now. That's right, call. That's the only way to get these rates. Experts are standing by 24/7 to get you the cheapest airfare and hotel rates available. So don't wait. Call now.
Listen, if we even think you owe us money, you won't know what hit you. We'll put liens on everything you own. Raid your bank accounts, retirement fund, pension. You'll open up your paycheck and cry because we'll already have the money.
Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Welcome to This Week Explained, the podcast that cuts through the noise to help you make sense of our ever-changing world. I'm Tiana, and each week my co-host Carvin and I break down the biggest global events and explain what they mean for you. This week, we're breaking down the latest on the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, Iran threatening attacks on U.S. military, China encircling Taiwan, and we will even get into what the big deal is with Greenland. There's a lot to unpack, so we're just going to get right into it. I want to start with Russia's recent military moves. President Putin has called up 160,000 conscripts, the largest draft since 2011. Okay, so what is the significance of this, and how does it fit into Russia's strategy?
Well, I mean, my first thought is it doesn't really scream, I'm ready for peace.
Exactly.
Right.
As I was saying, 160,000 conscripts, so I'm like, what peace deal?
But, I mean, it kind of got me thinking about, and you'll remember this, the stop-loss issues that we had in the U.S. military for the global war on terrorism. Remember, that was a big thing. They made a movie about stop-loss.
We had several friends who went through that, and you were supposed to. The only reason why you weren't is because we moved to North Carolina.
Yeah, well, yeah, and the commander at JSOC said, no, he's coming with us. He's not going to your stupid little...
Again.
Yeah.
You had... it would have only...
And then I ended up deploying every year.
You also up going places, and you wound up going places anyways, but...
But still, yeah, so during that stop-loss time,
Right.
there was no mention from George W. Bush that the U.S. was ready for peace in the Middle East. It was, we're at war, it's a tough war, and we're going to keep doing it.
Yeah, we need to call you up again.
Yeah, so I say all of that to once again say, it does not scream, I'm ready for peace, guys.
Yeah, I really am, I promise.
Yeah, but what you talked about, these 160,000 conscripts, it's this spring draft, which is part of Putin's plan to expand Russia's military to 2.39 million personnel, including 1.5 million active service members. And that's over the next 3 years. That's an increase of 180,000 troops. And what's notable here is that the draft pool has been expanded by raising the maximum age of conscription from 27 to 30.
Also convenient.
Very convenient.
Very convenient. And these conscripts, are they being sent to Ukraine, or are they readying themselves for something else?
So officially, Russia claims the new conscripts will not be deployed to Ukraine. But look, we've seen reports of conscripts in the past being killed in border regions and even sent to the front lines during the early stages of the war. There is a law within Russia that the new conscripts are not allowed to go into combat until they are properly trained. So it's that until they are properly trained.
But that's still so vague. Like, what does
Exactly.
that even mean?
Right. You go through basic training. When we went through basic training,
Yeah.
so you're not called a soldier in the Army until you complete basic training.
Right.
At that point, you're a soldier, and you can go off and do whatever. Now, after that, you go to your advanced individual training, AIT, get your job, and then they can send you to war. That's the U.S. military. What does that mean for Russia? Do you just go to a basic training? You could do a couple weeks, and then you're on the front lines?
Or Putin just goes, tag, you're it.
Yeah, and yeah, that could be one area of it. But for me, what officer would want? And we're different in the United States. We have non-commissioned officers or NCOs that lead the troops. Really, they lead the troops into battle.
But what officer wants under trained?
Wants a 2-week conscript. What are they going to do? This is purely chess pieces, right? They're pawns in this game. You're just going to move. You'll get killed, but at least we're moving the battlefield.
And the fact that they're conscripts, they're not there because they want to be necessarily.
Right. And so while the Kremlin's denying that these conscripts are going to be put into battle, history suggests otherwise.
Okay, so what do you think is driving this push to expand the military?
Look, it boils down to 2 factors. First, it's the staggering losses Russia has endured in Ukraine. Over 100,000 confirmed deaths. That's confirmed. The actual number is likely far higher than that.
Right.
Second, it's Moscow's perception of an increasing threat from NATO. Now, NATO's expansion, especially with Finland and Sweden joining, has added significant pressure to Russia's already vulnerable western border. That means a preparation for a large-scale combat operation has gone from unlikely, in my analysis, to possible on the European continent.
Speaking of NATO, U.S. negotiations between Washington and Moscow seem to have stalled, which we saw that coming 1,000 miles away. President Trump has expressed frustration with Putin, even threatening secondary tariffs because we don't have enough of those right now.
I mean, we talk about sanctions, right? Tariffs is the new buzzword right now.
So he's threatening secondary tariffs on countries buying Russian oil. Oh my God. So what's going on here?
Yeah, look, it is, for those who believed that Trump is just a puppet of Putin or some Russian plant, this is a significant shift in tone for President Trump. Now, like I said, for those who believe that, I'm not saying that that is true.
Or that we believe it.
Or that we believe it.
Just know that that's a very prevalent theory amongst the left wing.
And yeah, and if you listen to this podcast long enough, you know where we stand on, is Trump a Russian plant and stuff like that. And I was in Poland for overt anti-Russian aggression during the Trump administration. During the Russian dossier. The Russia colluded with the U.S. with Donald Trump to become president. If you collude with somebody, I don't think they would send troops to a bordering country to overtly monitor your aggression. I mean, so a significant shift in tone. And that's because for weeks he's been trying to broker a ceasefire in Ukraine, but Russia has rejected those U.S. proposals. They claim they do not address what Moscow sees as the root causes of this conflict.
Them invading?
No,
that's not it?
Okay.
Okay.
So the root cause, according to Putin, of this conflict is NATO expansion and the Nazification of Ukraine.
He changes it just whenever.
Yeah, I mean, he did that Tucker Carlson interview where he spent about 30 minutes just on the history of Russia.
Right.
And putting Ukraine on. So it's the history of the Soviet Union and going back thousands of years.
Right.
And that was key into understanding Putin's mind, in that this isn't just about Kharkiv or Donetsk or those eastern regions or even Odessa. This is about returning the Soviet Union, returning Mother Russia
to its former
glory. Exactly. So yeah, though we talked about the root causes of this conflict. Now, Kiev has made it very clear these demands from Russia, and I think the one big demand is that Ukraine would limit its military size. So Ukraine sees that, and they look back to removing nuclear weapons from Ukraine in the 90s,
Mm-hmm.
and they saw what happened once that occurred, which is Russia still was aggressive towards Ukraine. And they didn't have anything to protect themselves.
And they invaded Crimea.
And yep, they invaded Crimea, and then they invaded again in 2022. So these are non-starters. President Zelensky has called out Russia for dragging out the war and playing the same games they've been playing since 2014.
Ukraine is much smaller. This is a much smaller country. And yet they're being asked to limit the size of their military while Russia is expanding their military, which makes no sense at
I
all.
was waiting to see what you would come up with there. Makes no damn sense.
It makes no sense at all. Okay, so what is Trump's response to all of this?
I mean, from inside sources, we are hearing that Trump has grown increasingly impatient with Putin. He, as you said, is threatening to impose secondary tariffs or sanctions on countries that buy Russian oil, like China and India. Mike Baker and I had a conversation a couple days ago about this. Or was that
Yesterday.
Oh, that was yesterday.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Come on, man.
It's been a long week. And what he astutely brought up was that, the U.S. buys Russian oil through other distributors.
Are we going to tariff ourselves?
We looks like we're sanctioning ourselves
Tariff
here
sanctions.
in some of that. But I think the main sticking points to this or the main targets are China, Iran, India, and putting sanctions on those. Now, this is the first time the Trump administration has seriously threatened Russia with economic consequences that are tied to these particular ceasefire negotiations.
All right, well, let's shift to the rest of NATO because Finland and Sweden joined the alliance. And Finland, in particular, has taken some very bold steps, including resuming the use of anti-personnel lines. What do you think the significance of this is?
Yeah, this is a direct response to the perceived threat from Russia. With a border that Finland has with Russia that exceeds 1,300 kilometers, Finland is in a very precarious position. So by resuming the use of anti-personnel mines and increasing defense spending to 3% of GDP, Finland is signaling that it's taking its security very seriously.
And they're not alone, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So if you examine a map, you're going to notice a clear trend among the countries that have significantly increased their defense spending. Poland and the Baltic states, all of which share borders with Russia, have made very similar strategic decisions to Finland. And that's to include withdrawing from the Ottawa Convention, which bans anti-personnel mines. This reflects a broad regional shift towards strengthening defenses in response to the Russian threat.
And you mentioned in our personal conversations about this that on this map that you're talking about, that the farther away you get from Russia, like the European countries farther away from Russia, they are not spending as much as the Baltic states, because they feel comfortable and safe with that buffer, the Baltic states being the buffer.
Absolutely, yeah. Look at France, look at Canada. These are countries that feel like they're protected.
Canada is not Europe.
Right, no, but it's in NATO, and it's not carrying its weight, and that's a direct reflection of the United States. And what the United States has done for Canada, they don't have to build up their defense spending. Now, France, the UK's trying, but those countries within NATO that's further away from Russia, just as you said, they're not carrying their weight because they've figured, well, the Baltic states are our buffer zone. If anything happens, we'll have some time. If Russia expands their aggression, we'll have time to build up our defenses. Well, the time is now, and I think they're seeing that.
Well, Kervin, as we look ahead, what should we be watching for in the coming weeks?
I think we should keep a very close eye on Donald J. Trump.
Okay.
Well,
That's why he likes it.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, come on, every politician. That's what they want, to be looked at and to be glorified.
Probably want a little bit more positive coverage though than
Yeah.
he's been receiving lately, as of late. I mean,
It's but it's the PR adage, right? Which is
true.
Any news is good news. As long as you're in the news, it's good, right?
Yeah.
Now, Donald Trump has said he is pissed off with Putin.
That's a quote.
That is a quote from him, or from his team, that he said that he's pissed off with him.
He probably said it too, though.
Yeah, I could see that happening. Now, he also maintains he has a good relationship with Putin. So whether that dynamic leads to progress or more frustration remains to be seen. I'd also watch for NATO's next moves, particularly in Eastern Europe, as member states continue to bolster their defenses.
Well, thank you for that update. But now it is time to pivot to the situation in Gaza, which has escalated significantly over the past week. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz announced plans to expand military operations in Gaza, including seizing large areas of the territory to create what he called, quote, security zones, end quote. So what is the strategic goal behind this move?
Well, look, this is just a continuation of Israel's broader strategy, which we discussed last week. Israel wants...
In depth.
Yeah, very much in depth, and did some tangents as well. And it's what Israel's wanted to do from the very beginning. They want to completely annihilate Hamas, so neutralize Hamas, and then secure its own borders. So by expanding operations and creating these so-called, quote, security zones, end quote, or buffer zones, as some people call them, Israel aims to eliminate Hamas fighters and infrastructure while also establishing that buffer to prevent future attacks. Now, this approach comes with significant humanitarian consequences because this requires large-scale evacuations of Palestinians, and it intensifies an already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza.
Well, speaking of the humanitarian situation, reports indicate that Israel has blocked aid from entering Gaza since early March. Okay, so that is marking the longest aid blockade of the war. How dire is the situation for the population?
You know the answer to that. It's catastrophic. It really is.
How is he allowed to do that?
I mean, if we go back, we don't think we want to get into the...
Well, I'm just saying he was told he needed to let aid in.
Well, yeah, during the ceasefire.
Oh.
The ceasefire no longer exists because Hamas did not send the hostages that they agreed to. Hamas would say that Israel broke the ceasefire by performing strikes on
the West Bank.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't part of the ceasefire, right?
Right. That was specifically for Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
But now we have this whole situation, and we just have a catastrophic... It's terrible. It really is.
An entire population caught in the middle of this crap.
Yeah, and they were already struggling under the weight of the conflict. So this blockade has pushed the situation to the brink. Like, hospitals are overwhelmed, food and water supplies are dwindling, and the lack of humanitarian aid is exacerbating the suffering of the people there. The UN has even scaled back its operations because several of its staff and emergency responders were killed in recent Israeli strikes.
I saw that.
Now, this blockade is not just a military tactic. It's a form of pressure on Hamas, but it's the civilians who are paying the price.
It's not pressure on Hamas. They don't give a crap.
Well, it is, because it is working. The people of Gaza are rising up, and they're protesting not Israel now. They're protesting Hamas.
I'm the one that sent you that article.
I know. Yeah.
Hey, I was like, don't talk to me like I didn't send you that article.
No, and that's the dire consequences, right, of protesting against Hamas.
But that one guy, he got tortured.
That's right. That's the consequence of protesting against Hamas. But it is good to see... It's not good to see the consequences of it. It's good to see the people are trying to take
Their
back.
eyes are opening.
Yeah. And what, what are the second and third order effects of that? Could it be that the people protest against Hamas, they remove Hamas as the form of government,
Maybe work with Israel?
work with the Israelis? There is that trust issue there. I get that.
Huge.
It's not just between Hamas and Israel or other proxies. It is the people of Gaza and the Israelis. But if you can bridge that gap, could the people of Gaza work with the Israelis and find some sort of peace that works for both sides?
Push Hamas out
yes.
at the same time.
If they push Hamas out, then the ball is firmly in Israel's court to do something to help the Palestinians.
Right.
Unless the Israelis are lying. And it's not just about Hamas. It's about a complete takeover of Gaza.
Yeah.
So this is all things we need to be watching for as it happens. It hold people's feet to the fire when they say something, like when Putin says something and then does something different. You hold his feet to the fire.
Right. And, despite all this suffering, there are reports of renewed ceasefire talks. Hamas has said it accepted a proposal for a new truce, and Israel has responded with a counterproposal. So what is the status of those negotiations?
Yeah, I mean, both sides are under immense pressure to reach a deal, and they're under immense pressure from their own people. But these talks are still in a very delicate phase. Now, Hamas claims to have accepted a proposal that was mediated by Egypt and Qatar, but that includes the release of some hostages. Israel countered with its own terms. They want the release of at least 10 living hostages in exchange for a temporary ceasefire extension.
Do they even have 10 living hostages?
Well, that is probably one of the sticking points in this.
And one of the reasons why they haven't released any hostages since a couple weeks ago.
And it could all be stalling to formulate a PR plan that if they do not have that many living hostages,
they can somehow put it back on Israel.
Well, it was Israel's fault. They bombed Gaza to complete annihilation, and that's where the people were. Now, the U.S. is also involved in these talks, and they're coordinating with Israel on all of these proposals.
All right, so what is holding up this agreement? Because the sooner they reach an agreement, the sooner the people of Gaza can get their aid.
Well, maybe beyond the immediate issue of hostage and prisoner exchanges, there is a fundamental disagreement over the future of Gaza. Now, Hamas wants a permanent ceasefire and then the complete withdrawal of Israeli troops, while Israel insists on Hamas disarming and relinquishing control of the territory. These are irreconcilable demands. And at least for now, these are the things that are preventing any long-term resolution.
And in the meantime, the violence continues. Reports from Gaza indicate that at least 15 Palestinians were killed, including children, and there's been heavy shelling near the Egypt border. Is this a sign of a looming ground offensive, you think?
I mean, it certainly looks that way. Israel has already expanded its buffer zones and taken control of a corridor cutting through Gaza. Now, the intensified airstrikes and shelling suggest that Israel is preparing for a larger ground operation, and Defense Minister Katz has been clear. His intentions are to seize more territory in Gaza, and that aligns with the broader strategy of dismantling Hamas's infrastructure.
But this escalation isn't without criticism. The Hostages and Missing Families Forum I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. But this escalation isn't without criticism. The Hostages and Missing Families Forum in Israel has expressed outrage, and they're urging the government to prioritize the release of the hostages. So how is this playing out domestically for Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Look, he's walking a tightrope here. One side of it, he's under pressure from his hard-right coalition to maintain a hardline stance against Hamas. Then on the other side, there's this growing public frustration over the government's handling of the hostage situation. Now, many Israelis feel that the hostages should be the top priority, and Netanyahu's focus on military operations, that's being seen by some as a political move so that he can secure that far-right coalition rather than a humanitarian move.
All right, well, let's talk about, I sent an article to you earlier this week, and it was a story of a man who was openly protesting Hamas, a Palestinian man openly protesting Hamas, and he was brutally tortured for that. So what about these new protests that are starting to sprout up in Gaza of Palestinians
against Hamas.
Against Hamas. There are reports that the dissent is growing against Hamas. So what do you think? Well, I don't even need to really ask this question. What's driving that?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
The obvious answer there, it's the worsening conditions in Gaza. I know we touched on it briefly minutes ago, but look, what once was frustration with Israel by the people of Palestine for good reasons, it's now what we've talked about, focusing on Hamas for good reason. Hamas using human shields. And people are frustrated with Hamas's governance. They're frustrated with its role in prolonging the conflict. I think they understand Hamas's role in starting this conflict in October of 2023. But these protests are not going to go unpunished, as you just said. Hamas is known to crack down on dissent. They are doing that, brutally torturing people. And there's a concern that Hamas might use a temporary ceasefire to regroup and suppress these movements. It's a volatile situation, and the protesters are caught between a rock and a hard place. Hamas on one side and the Israeli military on the other.
Well, it's clear that both sides are under immense pressure. But with over 50,000 Gazans killed since the conflict began, the stakes couldn't be higher. Is there any hope for a resolution here, aside from, Palestinians being able to push past the distrust?
Yeah, I don't see a resolution in the near term. Long term, maybe. The ceasefire talks, that's a step forward, but they're unlikely to address the root causes of this conflict. Now, as long as both sides remain entrenched in their positions, the violence is going to continue, and the humanitarian crisis is going to worsen. The international community, I think, needs to step up its efforts to mediate, not just point the finger at one side or the other side, but even that's going to require a level of cooperation that currently is missing.
Well, we will obviously continue talking about this as more develops. For now, we will shift to the escalating tensions between the United States and Iran over its nuclear program and the latest moves in Syria's transitional government. But before we dive in, we're taking a quick break for a message from our sponsors. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Conservative investors. What does the name Reagan mean to you? Reagan was the ultimate conservative. We at the Reagan Gold Group consider ourselves the ultimate conservative gold company. Do you as a conservative investor see the storm clouds of chaos and uncertainty approaching? We do. The stock market hates uncertainty, and there is lots of chaos on the horizon. High inflation, unsustainable debt, and political tensions are rattling the markets and creating volatility. Does your portfolio have an anchor in this storm? You have car insurance, homeowners insurance, and life insurance. But what about your retirement savings, your 401k? We urge all fellow conservative investors to learn about the one asset that could help keep your nest egg from cracking under all this economic pressure: gold. Call the Reagan Gold Group right now to get your free wealth protection kit and ask us how to get up to $15,000 in bonus coins.
If you turned 65 recently like me, it's important you find a Medicare Advantage plan that gives you the coverage you're looking for. But finding one can be difficult. The best thing I did, and I suggest you do the same, is call a licensed insurance agent and let them walk you through your Medicare Advantage plan options. There are so many benefits you have access to, so make the call now and let the representatives explain everything to you. Our licensed insurance agents can offer you a variety of Medicare Advantage plans. Plus, the call is free, the information is free, and there's no obligation to enroll. We're here to make it easy for you to select a Medicare Advantage plan that may work for your needs. Finding a Medicare Advantage plan can be easy if you do what I did. Make a quick call right now to learn more. Thank you. Call 877-476-1681. That's 877-476-1681. Call now.
Welcome back, listeners. As we said before the break, we are discussing two major developments: the escalating tensions between the United States and Iran over its nuclear program, and the latest moves in Syria's transitional government. So Let's start with Iran, Kervin. What's the latest going on there?
Yeah, look, the situation is heating up between Iran and the U.S. Iran is ramping up its threats of military action to deter the United States from striking its nuclear facilities. And this comes after President Trump made a bold statement on March 30th, saying, quoting him here, "There will be bombing," end quote, if Iran doesn't agree to a new nuclear deal. He also threatened secondary tariffs, but he's threatened tariffs on everyone and everybody. I think we were threatened with tariffs on this podcast, maybe somewhere. I'm going to have to check the paperwork.
The tariff
paperwork.
The tariff paper, the list of countries.
Yes.
And those tariffs.
I'll get with Mike Leon over at Can We Please Talk. We'll see if his network is on
Getting tariffs.
That puts us in the crosshairs now. Kidding aside.
Yeah, he's being silly.
Yes. So Trump did threaten secondary tariffs on Iran, and that would sanction countries that trade with Iran.
That is a strong stance. So how has Iran responded? I imagine not well.
Yeah, they rejected direct negotiations with the U.S., but they did leave the door open for indirect talks. Now, at the same time, they've issued some serious threats. Iranian officials have warned that they'll attack U.S. allies and bases in the region if the U.S. does a strike on Iran or any of its proxies. Now, we know they're firing on the Houthis. That's low down on the totem pole for Iran amongst their proxies. Now, I think this is likely an attempt by Iran to discourage allies from cooperating with the U.S., and that would be because those allies would fear Iranian retaliation.
Well, what kind of retaliation are we talking about here?
Well, I mean, Iran did outline 3 potential responses. One was they explicitly threatened to attack U.S. bases and forces in the region, including Diego Garcia Island. That's in the Indian Ocean. It is a strategic military site for the United States. Now, Iran's missile range limitations make this a very challenging target, so good luck.
Good luck.
Their second option, they've suggested they could disrupt international trade.
So they're like, we might be able to hit Diego Garcia Island, and we might be able to disrupt
international
trade.
I mean,
we might do
keep
this.
them guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah. We might put a good podcast out.
One day.
No. Yeah, so what they could do there is they could disrupt international trade. They would close the Strait of Hormuz or, let the Houthis continue to seize ships.
But if Iran already thinks that the Houthis are low on the totem pole, why would the Houthis?
Why would they do that? Because the Houthis listen to Iran for some reason.
They're like, it's fine that we're literally the bottom.
Yeah, but they're getting money. They're getting munitions from Iran.
Okay.
So there is some support there.
Okay.
Now
That's what I was getting at. Are they supporting them at all?
Yeah, no, they definitely do. It's not as much support as you'll see towards Hezbollah and Hamas. But that's because that's a direct threat to Israel, and that's what Iran wants.
Right.
To threaten Israel. Now, Iran has also resurfaced threats to directly attack Israel. Speaking of.
That would be crazy.
Yeah, it would be. We saw what happened last April.
Right.
Wasn't a good go. Now, Iran's missile stockpile has been severely depleted by previous Israeli airstrikes. So that's another tough.
So they're just light suggestions at this point.
Yes.
But they want to sound big and bad.
Yeah, and I don't think they'll do any one of those 3. It'll be something that they haven't spoken about doing. If they intend to do...
If they actually do want to take action. Well, speaking of missiles, there's been some news about Iran's missile production capabilities. What is going on there?
Yeah, so Iran is working to rebuild its missile production capabilities. That's after those Israeli strikes. We talked about the ones in April. They had the ones in October. Or the ones in April from Iran, and Israel retaliated with strikes in October that damaged key facilities. There was a sanctioned Iranian vessel. That's the Jahran. It recently delivered a key component for solid missile fuel. And that was actually near the Bandar Abbas, and it suggests to me that Iran is trying to restore its long-range missile capabilities, though they could still use that same material for its short-range ballistic missiles, so it could be anything with that one.
Well, it sounds like Iran is preparing for a worst-case scenario, but they're not acting alone, are they?
No, absolutely not. Iran is coordinating with Russia. They're coordinating with China, and that's on nuclear issues. Just last week, Iranian officials met with Russian and Chinese counterparts to discuss sanctions relief and nuclear talks. Now, it's unclear how much support Iran is going to get from those two, but this trilateral coordination signals a shared opposition to U.S. policy.
All right, well, let's shift gears to Syria. There's been a lot of buzz about the new transitional government. So can you let our listeners know what the story is there?
Yeah, I don't think we've hit on this in a while since they stood up their government. And that's with Syrian interim president Ahmed al-Shara. And he announced a new transitional government this week. And on the surface, it looks like he's trying to broaden representation. He's including some minorities and technocrats in, and what he's doing here is putting them in these less critical roles. But the reality is that he's consolidating power by appointing loyalists to key ministries like the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Interior, Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of Justice.
So it's more about maintaining control than actually fostering inclusivity?
Yeah, look, Shara has placed Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS.
Say it again.
Sorry, one more time. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham.
I just
That
love it.
Yeah. So that's HTS. That's the terrorist organization.
Yeah, I will not be pronouncing that word.
Gotcha.
Okay.
So when we get into the Arabic words, I can do that one, but
Yeah.
I'll leave you to do the Spanish and some of the other.
Don't discount your abilities, sir.
I gotta
You're fine.
be better at this, guys.
We all got to be better at this.
We're supposed to be professional.
I'm not
No.
professional at anything, okay?
Now, back to HTS. So Shara is putting loyalists from HTS in positions that directly impact internal security and state stability. Think Ministry of Defense. That's a huge one.
For some reason, I thought you were about to say Ministry of Magic.
Oh, well, that too. He has not declared who is heading the Ministry of Magic.
And has not declared that.
No, it could
'Cause
be
that's-
Snape.
that-
Could be
Well, no, R.I.P. Can't be. R.I.P.
another tangent.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know what is wrong with us today. We're hyper.
Yeah. I did have some coffee just before coming on here.
Oh, I didn't.
Yeah. So you're
It's
just
just-
feeding off natural.
This is natural energy that I don't usually have. Actually, I think it's just I'm happy to finally not be sick.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody can hear neither one of us is hacking up a lung like we had.
A month of that.
Yeah.
And it's
So.
it's finally gone. All right. Sorry.
All right. So we have these HTS loyalists. They're being put in positions that directly impact the internal security. And this is to ensure Shara's influence over the government while sidelining those rivals within Syria. Now, minority groups like the Kurds and the Druze have criticized the government for its lack of representation. They are calling this a one-party government.
Well, can you explain how these minority groups are responding?
Look, I mean, no surprise here. It's overwhelmingly negative. Kurdish groups like the Syrian Democratic Council have condemned their exclusion. They are warning that this is the third time they've been ignored in key political processes. Now, the Druze majority Suwaida Military Council, they have also rejected the government. They say there needs to be a more inclusive approach to this government. These criticisms highlight the challenges that Shara is facing right now. Those challenges are in building legitimacy for his transitional government.
There is an awful lot to digest here, Kurtman. So let's wrap up with some of the key takeaways. What should our listeners keep in mind about these developments?
I mean, well, in both of these situations, the key takeaway is that everything is incredibly volatile. It's the Middle East. On one end, you have Iran. They're using threats and military posturing to what they would say deter the United States and Israeli actions while rebuilding their own missile capabilities. Now, for Syria, this transitional government is a double-edged sword. While it's a step toward political restructuring, Shura was the leader of a terrorist organization. So this consolidation of power and the exclusion of key groups is something that was predictable, but it risks undermining its legitimacy.
Thank you. Let's move to the Indo-Pacific and discuss the escalating tensions between China and Taiwan. China has launched a large-scale military drill around Taiwan, and they're accusing its leaders of being separatists and parasites, pushing the island toward war, closer toward war. These drills are accompanied by a heavy propaganda campaign and have raised alarms across the region. So let's start with the basics here. What exactly is happening?
Yeah, like the issue here is that the People's Liberation Army, or the PLA, launched that series of military exercises around Taiwan. And it's not just that the drills and the exercise happen, it's that they involved forces from everywhere. The PLA Navy, the plan, the Army, the Rocket Force, even the Coast Guard. They were described by the CCP as a stern warning to Taiwan's government. Beijing accuses that government of engaging in separatist activities, and these exercises were extensive. They focused on combat readiness, maritime and land strikes, and even, for one of the first times, had a blockade placed during the exercise.
Yikes. That is a significant show of force, but why now? Why this week? Because, I mean, Taiwan has never made it a secret of what they want to happen. I mean, this is not new. This is not new for them. So what is driving this escalation on China's end?
I mean, we know timing is everything in geopolitics, right? And I'm glad you brought this up because this escalation is no exception to that. Beijing's actions appear to be a direct response to recent statements and policies from Taiwan's president, Lai Ching-te. Now, he leads the pro-sovereignty Democratic Progressive Party, has taken a strong stance against Beijing. Just last month, he labeled China a, quote, foreign hostile force, end quote. Some people would not argue with that. China does take offense to that, though. And he announced measures to counter its China's growing influence in espionage operations. Now, like I said, China views these moves as provocative, and they've ramped up its military and propaganda efforts, and that is solely to send a clear message to Taiwan. These particular drills were launched with little warning. That's pretty unusual compared to previous exercises. We usually know far enough in advance this is happening. And so that signals quite the shift in Beijing's approach.
Yeah, because I know usually we mention it like a week or two ahead of time because they announce it.
Yeah, and the reason you do that is because it is quite provocative to do those exercises, and it could be viewed by some people in the region as an escalation, right? And so
or an act of war.
And then preemptive measures are taken.
Right.
And it could, what was just an exercise could lead to war because it's viewed that way because the proper channels.
Nobody knew about it.
Right. Now, I can almost assure you that through back channels, there were calls saying, we are going to do this.
Yeah, it just wasn't out in the press.
Yeah, and those were kept on the Signal chat app so that no one was able to. Another joke. It was not. I hope it wasn't.
Yeah.
Hope those conversations are kept through very secure channels, classified channels.
And what about this propaganda campaign? It seems like China is using more than just military pressure here.
They absolutely are using more than just military pressure. This campaign is part of their strategy. The PLA flooded social media with these nationalistic hashtags, the videos, posters. One particularly striking image depicted Taiwan's president as a cartoon bug being held over a burning Taipei, the capital of Taiwan. Now, the message to that should be very clear to everyone. Beijing is trying to delegitimize Taiwan's leadership and portray them as reckless separatists leading the island towards destruction. This propaganda isn't just aimed at Taiwan's domestic audience, though. It's also designed to influence international perceptions, particularly in the United States. Beijing wants to paint Lai as a troublemaker, and they want to deter the United States from maintaining its high levels of support for Taiwan.
I don't think a picture of Lai as a bug roasting over Taipei is going to change U.S. perceptions, but okay.
Yep.
I mean, I guess, whatever. So, do you think China is ready to launch a full-scale invasion of Taiwan?
No, not yet. So we'll go back again, talking with Mike Baker yesterday. He actually doesn't see this happening at all. He just does not think that that's what Xi Jinping wants to do. He's going to try to use gray zone warfare and not a full-scale invasion. I still disagree with that. I do believe 2027 is the year we see an attempt at a full-scale invasion, and we'll see where that goes. So they're not there yet.
Okay.
That's 2 years from now, but they are getting very close. I still believe that China is building the military capability needed for such an operation. We saw that with the roll-on, roll-off barges, with these new fighter jets.
That huge military complex.
The huge military complex, yep.
How many, like 10, 5
It's
to 10 times
10
bigger
times bigger than the Pentagon.
Yeah.
I did go on to NTD a month ago, right, and discuss that with for one of their programs on China.
Right.
And just how massive it is and what it means. It means that they are trying to do what's called command and control, or C2, or build a C2 node, which would allow them to then control all aspects. So it's be a joint command and control center that controls all aspects, and you only do that in a wartime effort. So that's getting built up really big, really quickly. So like I said, they're not there yet, but in the meantime, they are using military pressure. They're using propaganda, other coercive tactics to push Taiwan towards submission. I still do believe that's what they want. If they never have to go to war and they can take over Taiwan, to them, that's a win. Now, it's also worth noting that Taiwan, though, they're not sitting idly by. Their military and government have been ramping up their response training, and they've elevated their readiness level, one of the highest levels they've ever had it at, and that's to ensure these drills don't turn into a real attack.
Okay, so what is the end game here? Is this just about Taiwan, or does China have broader ambitions?
I mean, it's definitely more than, it's about more than Taiwan. The immediate goal here, though, is to bring Taiwan under Xi's control, but the broader ambition is to establish dominance in the Indo-Pacific. These drills are part of a larger strategy to project power and then challenge the United States and its allies in the region. Now, Taiwan's presidential office, they did point out that China's recent exercises have extended beyond the Taiwan Strait to areas near Australia, our great friends in New Zealand, Japan, Korea, the Philippines, also the South China Sea. And this shows Beijing's ambitions. They are regional, but they're also global.
We are witnessing what analysts describe as a significant realignment of power dynamics across the Indo-Pacific region. So we are going to turn our attention northward to the Arctic, specifically Greenland, a territory that has emerged as a focal point of strategic interest and international competition.
Mm-hmm.
While China maintains relevance in this discussion, our focus centers on Greenland itself. And also Greenland, I'm just so sorry about what's going on right now. Oh my gosh. This massive island has generated considerable diplomatic activity in recent years, from the United States expressing acquisition interest to its increasingly prominent role in Arctic security frameworks, which is probably why Trump wants to buy it. But Kermit, can you help our viewers understand the fundamental question here? What factors have elevated Greenland from a remote Arctic territory, run by Denmark, to a centerpiece of geopolitical strategy?
Yeah, Greenland is the world's largest island, and while it's part of what you said, it's part of the Kingdom of Denmark, it is a self-governing territory with a population of just over 56,000 people. They're mostly Inuit people there. Now, what makes Greenland so important is its location and its resources. So it sits at the heart of the Arctic. That's becoming a geopolitical hotspot as climate change melts. The sea ice, it opens up new shipping routes and access to untapped natural resources like rare earth elements, oil, and natural gas.
So it's not just about the land itself, but what's under it and around it.
Exactly. This is a geopolitical discussion, not merely some simplistic notion that Trump heard offhand and then he impulsively acted upon it. I know that was one of our first thoughts about this. He heard the term Greenland and he just went, "Oh, that sounds good. Let me go promote buying Greenland." I don't think
I ever thought that.
though that's one of the theories that first popped up in my head because that happens. It's like Canada.
Yeah,
Hey, we could
that
make it the 51st state.
Yeah.
It got a chuckle from people, and now it's becoming what it is right now, which is two allies that don't like each other anymore.
This is really fun.
It's depressing.
Yeah.
And so the reason I say that about Greenland is because in doing the research for this, it's very notable that Greenland's proximity to emerging Arctic shipping routes, like the Northwest Passage and the Transpolar Sea Route, make it a strategically vital place. These routes could eventually bypass traditional choke points like the Suez or the Panama canals, and that would cut shipping times significantly in that region. And on top of that, Greenland is part of the GIUK, or the GIUK gap. That's Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom. It's a key choke point for monitoring Russian naval movements. Let's not forget as well the U.S. military presence at Patuxent Space Base. That's one of the bases there. It's formerly Thule Air Base. When Space Force took over, they made that air base into a space base. It makes a ton of sense because of its proximity and its location on the globe. Yes, this is a globe that we live on. And that is a critical site for missile defense and space surveillance.
I know this is not the first time the United States, I know everybody's like shocked right now with what's going on with Trump, but this is not the first time the United States has tried to acquire Greenland.
Mm-hmm.
They tried to acquire Iceland too.
Yep.
And I understand, where they're positioned, it would be helpful, but they're already being governed by other countries. And just because we decide we want it doesn't mean they have to give it to us.
Yeah, and also we're in the 21st century now. Why? I get it's 56,000 people that live there,
Right.
and so they probably need some help with infrastructure and things like that. But I thought colonialism was dead in the 21st century, but it's alive and well, and with Denmark, of all places.
Denmark. I love Denmark.
Yeah.
But okay, so let's just get back to it. That brings us to the United States. And President Donald Trump has made waves suggesting that we buy Greenland.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us, what's the story there?
Yeah, look, I think the interest in Greenland wasn't as outlandish as it might have seemed at first glance. Now, Trump has framed it as a national security priority. He cites the need to counter growing Russian and Chinese influence in the Arctic. Greenland's natural resources and strategic location make it a valuable asset, but Trump's rhetoric here, threatening economic coercion or even military force, was a bit shocking, and honestly, it alienated both Greenland and Denmark.
Yeah, why? That's the thing here is the, threatening military action to acquire it. Dude, we aren't Russia.
Yep.
We aren't China. We supposedly allow for people to live their lives.
Yep. There was a point where people said that the U.S. should stop being the police of the world. Maybe we're stopping from being the police of the world, and we're now the villains of the world.
Oh, great. Well, I mean, everything's got to come.
Be
full
careful
circle.
what you wish for, people.
Everything comes full circle. The pendulum swings. We were the heroes, and now we're swinging back in the other
That's
direction.
the Batman phrase.
What? What's
You
about?
either die a hero or you live long enough to become the villain.
Okay, well.
Now, I'm not saying the U.S. is the villain right now.
Why?
I want to put that out
That's not the
completely.
U.S.
Right. And that goes into all these conversations about, well, the U.S. is losing their allies. And look,
Most people don't feel like this is a good idea.
Right. And it's about an administration.
Yeah.
And it's an administration that at the point in November, the majority of Americans voted for. That is not going to be the administration in 2028.
Even though he's threatening to try to find loopholes in the Constitution
Right.
for a third term. He's like, based on my votes, I should be able to run for a third term. No, you shouldn't. The Constitution is in place for a reason.
And I would suggest everyone, I'm not a constitutional lawyer.
Yeah.
I did raise my right hand and uphold defense of the Constitution.
Yeah.
Against enemies, domestic and abroad. And I still say, even after getting out of uniform, I never relinquished that duty to uphold the Constitution. I think he'd have a very tough time. Now, since we are on Leon Media Network, At Least You Heard It Here is one of the podcasts, and she did a full deep dive on if
he can find
the loophole and what those loopholes might be. She does a fantastic episode. Listen to her, not us, about constitutional law.
Yeah, don't. Okay. So, obviously, the U.S. hasn't backed off entirely from this notion that we should be able to grab Greenland just because we want it. Vice President J.D. Vance recently visited Greenland and had some strong words for Denmark.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen a guy hate Europe so much in my life.
It's so weird because I know I mentioned this last week. I think I mentioned it last week about how before he became vice president, he went on and on about how much he hated Trump. Like his internet footprint is him talking about how much he can't stand the Trump administration.
Now, and you make a good point there. And it was a point that was made during the vice presidential debates. There was a question to J.D. Vance. You said this about Donald Trump, and they put his tweets calling Donald Trump so many.
Not just tweets, videos.
Right, but they put the tweets up there.
Right.
And it was just him railing against Donald Trump, and he had a brilliant answer for it.
Oh, what?
It was one of the more impressive moments in the vice presidential debate, and it was something that I think he knew was coming, and he had been practicing it because he said, "You're right. I did say a lot of disparaging things towards President Trump, and it was because I believed what the media said about President Trump. But when I met the man and I got to know the man, I saw a different person than the media portrayed him to be. And that's why he's the vice president." It is a brilliant answer.
It is, honestly.
And it seemed like it could have been one of those gotcha questions, hard to defend.
Right.
And so that's why I assume.
So we blame the media.
Right. And that blame the media, blame Europe. Just getting back to, we looked at the Signal chat, right, that was released. And one of the key points was J.D. Vance talking about how much he hated Europe and wanted Europe to pay for everything. He didn't want to come to Europe's defense. Now, in that, Vance then criticized Denmark as well, like you mentioned, and he criticized them for what he called a failure to adequately invest in Greenland's security and well-being. He pledged more U.S. resources. He said naval ships and military icebreakers would be sent to Greenland so that it would counter Russian and Chinese activity in the Arctic. But his comments, particularly about Denmark, did not sit well with leaders from either country.
Well, the thing is if they don't want it, they shouldn't have to take it.
Right.
If they don't want our help and they're perfectly fine with the status quo, leave them alone.
Yep.
don't get to pressure somebody into doing something. Well, you shouldn't be able to,
Well,
but that's
yeah.
not the state of things. All right, so let's talk about Greenland itself. It is a self-governing territory, self-governing. And so how much autonomy does it really have, though?
Yeah, I mean, it has significant autonomy over domestic matters. Those are education, health, natural resource development, but Denmark still controls foreign, defense, and security policy. Now, with all that said, Greenland's autonomy in these areas is growing. In 2024, they released its foreign, defense, and security strategy. They titled it Greenland in the World. Nothing about us without us. And that defense strategy emphasizes Greenland's right to self-determination and its goal of eventual independence.
Independence from Denmark.
Yes.
So, I mean, it sounds like a long-term goal, but what is holding Greenland back from getting independence now?
56,000 people living on an island of that size. They still have an economic reliance on Denmark.
Right.
Now, Greenland receives substantial subsidies from Denmark, and that makes up a significant portion of its yearly budget. So while developing its natural resources could help Greenland achieve economic self-sufficiency, there are some challenges. You've got harsh conditions. It's what we learned in school about Greenland.
Greenland is icy, and Iceland is green.
Nice. This was so that's the Mighty Ducks Part 2.
What?
They all right, tangent time. The second installment, D2, the Mighty Ducks. They are the U.S. national team
Of children.
And Iceland is the main. They're the main villain of the movie, right? They're the big
bad.
The big bad. I think it would have been a lot better to be Russia, but I think at that point, I don't know what the geopolitics when I was 7, what was going on. But there's a very fun scene between Gordon Bombay, the coach of the Mighty Ducks.
So Emilio Estevez.
Emilio! And one of the female characters from Iceland, not one of the children, because it's a love interest.
Oh.
But Emilio Estevez's character, Gordon Bombay, talks about Iceland and how it must be really harsh and very icy. And she says, Greenland is full of ice, and Iceland is very nice.
Oh.
I always resonated with. I was like, is it really? And I had to look it up, and yeah, it's there is something that I learned in school, and I don't know if you learned the same thing, but
They did it to trick.
They did it to trick
Yep.
other people to not invade Iceland. So they called it Iceland, but it's very green. Not very green, but it's beautiful.
It has periods where it is green.
And then Greenland was called Greenland as a counter to that.
Yeah.
So there's
Who
that
knows
whole
if that's
tangent
true?
to say very harsh conditions. So with harsh conditions come high costs. And then there's also environmental concerns. Now, Greenlanders are very divided on mining, for example. Some see it as a path to independence. Others worry about the environmental and cultural impacts of that mining.
Right. You mentioned Russia and China would tie into this earlier. So how do they factor into this Arctic power struggle?
Yeah, Russia's been militarizing the Arctic for years. And now with its invasion of Ukraine in 2022, that has only heightened tensions in the region. All Arctic states except Russia are now NATO members, and that has increased the region's strategic importance. Now, China, on the other hand, has been trying to establish a foothold in Greenland through investments in mining and infrastructure, but many of these projects have stalled because of U.S. pressure. Greenland has made it clear that it is going to decide its own future. But with that said, it does remain a focal point for great power competition.
I like that. Yes, Greenland, you should decide your own future and not have all these other people on the outside. Anyways. So what should our listeners take away from this about Greenland?
Well, look, honestly, it did sound like a joke at first, right? A lot of people thought this was a joke. Greenland, why Greenland? Greenland's insignificant. Greenland is a microcosm of the broader geopolitical shifts that we are seeing, not just in the Arctic, but globally. It highlights the intersection of climate change, of resource competition, but mainly this great power rivalry that we're seeing. The U.S., Russia, and China all see the Arctic as a strategic frontier, and Greenland is right smack dab in the middle of it all. At the end of the day, I believe what Tiana believes. Greenland's future should be decided by its own people, not by the external powers at play. This opinion time. If you've gotten this far into the podcast, I want to give my opinion on where we sit here. The U.S. and other nations need to respect the people of Greenland and find ways to cooperate on shared challenges, like all of this stuff, with the people of Greenland.
Boom. Oh, wait, I can't say that, can I?
Is that trademarked?
I don't know.
How many booms?
How many booms?
Oh my
5
goodness.
big booms. Costco, guys.
The Costco guys.
Sorry, I'm not stealing your trademark saying Costco, guys, I promise.
Not a sponsor.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna. Never mind. So Greenland may be remote, but it's clear that what happens there has global implications. So thank you, Kerbin, for breaking it all down for all of us. Is there anything else that you would like to discuss?
Nope. Let's be done with this.
Thank you so much for listening to This Week Explained. We hope you found it both informative and engaging. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. For more in-depth coverage of these stories and more, be sure to follow us on social media at This Week Explained.
Tiana, thank you so much. And until next week, stay safe out there.